we still have a lot of work to do to rebuild this city and create a new economy that is sustainable beyond not just the automotive industry, but other industries that are feeders and can take advantage of the workforce that we have here, the universities that are producing the talent that we need for us to future-proof this economy.
That's Detroit Economic Growth Corporation President and CEO Kevin Johnson. And this is your Daily Detroit for June 5th, 2019. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jairus Days. Detroit is seeing a resurgence in business investment, most recently highlighted by a multi-billion-dollar deal with Fiat Chrysler to build a new Jeep plant next to the existing Jefferson North Assembly plant, bringing nearly 5,000 jobs to Detroit's east side.
That's refocused a lot of attention on the use of economic incentives to lure large-scale corporate investment in cities like Detroit. Can Detroit expect more of the same? Are tax incentives even necessary? And what are the industries of Detroit's future? Today's show is a conversation with Johnson from the Mackinac Policy Conference. That's up right after we pay some bills. First, Repurpose. Get hired by Detroit's best startups and companies. Join their talent community at repurpose.co. That's repurpose.co.
Second, Milo.agency. Milo is a marketing agency that produces amazing experiences for audiences. They partner with their clients to drive business and create innovative content. Do cool stuff with them and talk to Billy at Milo.agency. So the news of the month, really, and I think it's something people are going to be talking about for a while because there's so many jobs involved, is what's happening with FCA. And the DEGC played a really critical role over there. So just to kind of set the table and get into everything we're going to talk about, what exactly, from your perspective, is the story over there?
Well, you know, what this means for the city of Detroit, it's kind of hard to measure because the investment itself and the amount of jobs that are being created are so large that it's really hard to measure it. What we have to do at this point is look at the overall ecosystem of what it will take to sustain that investment, sustain the project itself, the facility, and that means let's work collectively with FCA to identify the suppliers that are needed. Now, they already have, some that are already located here, but there are some that aren't even here yet. We'll be making a couple of announcements in the next couple of weeks on companies that don't have operations in the city right now that plan on starting operations as a result of the investment. And that number could be another 3,200 jobs on top of the almost 5,000 that have been announced by FCA. So we're seeing that kind of impact 2 weeks into the project being announced. That should tell you that our job at DEGC is to go out around the world and talk about not only FCA, but other automotive entities in this region that they should try to consider investing in our area for.
Detroit has a long history of large developments that often you look at them later on and they're kind of islands unto themselves. If you think about the Renaissance Center, right? Let's go way back in time and think about the Renaissance Center and how it was built kind of by itself on an island. The theory of economic development with the city isn't that anymore. It doesn't really seem like it's aligned with just the super project. You just talked about that spinoff, but there hasn't been as much talk lately about all the spin-off jobs that happen when you're doing developments the size of FCA or the size of a lot of things that have been going on.
I mean, if you take that $2.5 billion investment, which is coincidentally the largest project in the United States of America right now. The largest project in the United States of America is in Detroit, Michigan. The number of jobs that have been announced in Detroit, Michigan is larger than any other project in the United States of America. We've come a long way for me and others to be able to say that. So you talked about what the spinoff actually means. And I can't tell you how often our phone rings as a result of this opportunity. So where it happens, in an urban core. Now, that's the other unique quality about the project. The easier path for large-scale manufacturers like FCA and others is go out and find some farm, put a tape line around the perimeter.
North Dakota has a lot of room.
There you go. And build it right there. So when you have an urban-centered project like this, then we had to be strategic in how we made that happen. Because again, don't sleep on the fact that we had to compete for that opportunity. There are a lot of places in the United States of America that wanted to say what I just said and would have put a far greater amount of resources behind the project to attract it. So, I know we'll talk a little bit about, why we invested in a project, why cities need to invest and communities need to invest in a project. But I will tell you, and it's no fault of ours, it's the way the system it works right now. But there are many places in the United States of America that are hurting, that need an investment of $2.5 billion, that need 5,000 jobs in their community. So we're special, but we ain't that special.
Well, that's one thing I think about when we cover the city, is that there's a lot of ideas that Detroit is a completely unique snowflake. And in so many ways, a lot of the things we deal with, yes, we have unique challenges in some places, but a lot of these things have been dealt with in other cities in different ways. And maybe we have an opportunity to learn from some people's successes and mistakes and implement some of that stuff in the city.
Well, I think that's why new voices are important. I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia. And trust me.
That place is doing well.
Well, trust me. If FCA called down to Atlanta and said they want to bring $2.5 billion worth of investment and 5,000 jobs, you would see some things happen that I don't think it'd make your head explode.
And that's an area that's economically successful.
And that's an economically successful area. Not to say that Detroit isn't successful, but there are cities that are doing extremely well that would have welcomed this opportunity that we have and would take this full advantage of the investment that it has made in our community. So I don't want us to get too, I wouldn't call it a level of arrogance, but let's not get arrogant. We still have a lot of work to do to rebuild this city and create a new economy that is sustainable beyond not just the automotive industry, but other industries that are feeders and can take advantage of the workforce that we have here, the universities that are producing the talent that we need for us to future-proof this economy. And that's the big play. And what we're doing at DEGC is, okay, it's great. We want to make sure that our automotive industry is built on pillars that are as strong as they've ever been. But if we don't start focusing on economic diversification, we would have lost this opportunity. And we don't get this often. You don't get to build an economy based on an investment like this that often. Hell, it hadn't happened in 30 years. So let's manage our position very well.
How did we, just in a greater sense, in America, because this is not unique to Detroit, how do we get to this place where, it's just the fact, and I know that there's critics out there who do not like incentives. Individual projects get people more heckled up than others, right? Something that brings a lot of jobs that are full-time is going to get a lot less resistance than some place that hires a bunch of part-time workers. How do we get into this place?
Well, and it happened before I got into the economic development.
Oh, I know.
business.
This is something that's decades old.
But there were responsibilities that the government has to grow its tax base. And the bigger the investment is in growing the tax base, the partnership begins to form. And I look at the utilization of incentives as a partnership. What we want the private investor to do is to deliver jobs. What we want the private investment to do is to grow the tax base. What do you do with the resources that a tax-based growth, what's the yield on that? Well, this is what you do with it. You stand up a stronger police force. You stand up a stronger fire department. You stand up, you build a better infrastructure. You create parks. You create recreational opportunities. You create quality of life amenities that citizens in a city that wants that. Most cities that I've been in want that. There's a way you have to pay for it, and you just can't build it off building single-family houses and multifamily housing. You can't do it like that. Everybody has to participate. So when you have those kinds of dynamics in play, And when a project of this size and others comes to your attention, you begin to make partnerships happen. Now, Detroit is not unique in that space, nor will it ever be. But we do have some uniqueness, one of which is we still have people that are employable that aren't working. We still have neighborhoods that need to be reinvested in, and we need resources to make that happen. So we're trying to create a new Detroit, and that the utilization of tax abatement and incentives to get those investments that we need in order to create this new Detroit have to be put into the equation.
So you would say that at the end of the day, this money that gets put in incentives, it comes back because it's got to come back in a greater amount in order to pay for all of those services, right? So that math works out for you.
The math works beautifully.
Okay.
So
what are we looking at, like on like a dollar, not necessarily FCA project, but like on an average basis? What are we looking at? Is like you put $1 of incentives in, kind of what comes back to the Treasury over years?
Well, what happens is, and it really depends on the size and scale of the project. So, what I measure as an economic development professional is my return on investment. We typically want to look at between 5 to 8 to 1. So $1 in, $8 out. Now, let's just do quick math on this project. All right, $2.6 billion. You add in the state incentives and the city incentives. We could just talk about the per job cost for that. It's $57,800 per job for the incentive. All right. The last project, automotive project, you know what the yield was on that? It's over $200,000 per job. That the balance between what the incentives were and what the investment was. $200,000 per job. Ours is $57,000 per job. I think we did pretty good negotiating.
So all of that filters through, and I'm just walking through for people at home because all of this. I mean, you and I both kind of like work in this every day in different ways. Like we cover it. This is your job. This is your life. How does that filter through? So that person makes 50. You're spending 57,000, and then so it's per job. But then that person makes that money, and then that filters through their taxes. And then how does that all come down through?
So we call it. We do an economic impact analysis. All right, and you factor all those things in. You factor in if that person's average salary. So our incentive was basically about $57,000 per job. All right, that person's average salary of those jobs could be anywhere from about $49,000 to about $80,000 per job. So what does an $80,000 job in Detroit mean, or any other city in the United States? What does that mean? That means now I can buy a car. Now I can fix up my house. Now I can buy a house. Now I can go shopping in the mall. Now I can spend more. I have more disposable income. And those dollars circulate throughout the city. So sales tax increases, property tax values increase. Who's the beneficiary of that? The city. All right. So it's not that complicated, but if you just look at just the headline, you missed it. All right. So the headline's important, but it's called trickle down economics in the right way, and that's where I think our job as promoters of Detroit and promoters of economic development responsibility is to make sure that the public understands the benefit of the work that we do and how it impacts one zone to the next.
So let's talk about that, the spin-off there on the east side. We talked a bit about FCA and what it is, but there's going to be a lot more happening over there. I don't assume that you have new announcements here, although you're welcome to give them. But I know that you're saying there's going to be more projects. And then I think, doesn't this tie into kind of like a mobility push? Because if you see what's happening with Ford, it's really clear. There's a telegraph that it isn't just about the car, it's about mobility in general.
It is. And so when I talked about economic diversification, if you think about all the components that goes into a car, right? Is that the only use of those components? Right? can it be where you use mobility in apparel?
Well, just as an example, somebody we covered on the show, Pingree Detroit, I have one of their business card holders right here, based in the city. This is made out of automotive leather scrap.
Who knew? Why can't it be a purse? Why can't it be the band on a Shinola watch? What, it is these. We had to think more creatively about how, and I think companies are beginning to do that. Yes, we want the supply chain to be strong in supporting an FCA or Ford or GM, but that can't be the whole deal, right? And so our job is to take it and go, how do you use it in apparel? How do you use it in food? How do you use it in the financial services sector? How do you use it? Because those are the pillars for which the new Detroit is going to be built on. And that is where we get excited, because now when I go out around the world selling Detroit, I can spend the whole meeting and not talk about automotive.
Is that generally what happens?
Yeah,
Is that people just go straight to cars?
Or
automotive?
Because of the brand.
Okay.
So if you think about, if I go in and I say I'm from Detroit, Michigan, I want to talk to you about apparel manufacturing. You want to do this. Why? Well, because we have a ecosystem in the apparel sector that's growing and thriving, and you need to be a part of it. Why? Because in Detroit, we make stuff, and we make it well. We make it better than any other place in the world, and you can take advantage of the skills of the people that live and work in Detroit and grow your apparel business, right? And here are the companies that are there. And I start listing them out. And I go, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, right? So we have to begin to be more outward facing in the other areas and the other verticals of the industry clusters that we have the capability and the excellence to work in, and that's our job.
What are those verticals so people kind of know? Because I think even in the general press, people think Detroit cars. Mm-hmm. What are some of those verticals, and kind of what are you pushing forward?
So what I mentioned earlier, I mentioned one already, and that is apparel. Obviously, food is another industry cluster that we are focusing on. Financial services, Rocket Mortgage and Quicken Loans and Chemical Bank. We're in the financial services sector. Do you think financial services in Detroit? Most people don't. Even
though credit was automotive credit was huge, but it was from here.
Most people don't think about it, but we are a financial services sector in Detroit, Michigan. All right, Ally Financial. These are so when you say financial services, you think New York and Charlotte and San Francisco. You need to start thinking about Detroit as a financial services sector, and we have the ability to go out in the market and sell those. Also, in the area of logistics, all right? I always tell people all the time, Detroit is a unique city. Why? Because you can float it, fly it, or roll it anywhere in the world. Not many cities can say that. You can float it up the Detroit River out to the Atlantic Ocean. You can fly it at one of our great airport, and we are dissected by interstates that run north, south, east, and west. Not many cities can say that. So from a logistics perspective, it makes total sense for people to come and set up opportunities here in Detroit. So we're excited about the logistics sector and getting things to the market just in time in any of the three paths you can take.
All right. Interesting conversation, Jared. Nice job with that. It's clear that to me that incentives are here to stay, and love them or hate them. And I've been a critic.
The thing is that the entire country, America, from coast to shining coast, is addicted to incentives. And these are the kind of deals that, I hate to say it, we need to watch them, but it's almost like it has to happen, especially with how landlocked Detroit is. Like, one of the biggest challenges, and we've talked about this a few times, is that Detroit does not have contiguous pieces of land. If you think about that interview with Dan Carmody trying to get space for Wolverine Packing, and you name it, although Detroit has a lot of empty land, it has lots of little pieces of empty land.
Yeah, and his point, that had this been pitched to Atlanta, they would have come up with, let's be honest, like any city in the South where, there's already a lot of auto plants going, they would have stumbled over themselves to put together some kind of package to get a non-union auto plant in their state.
The real question with incentives is this: will America ever unilaterally disarm? Because until it does,
right,
it will never change. And as much as philosophically, I have a big libertarian streak. There's a lot of things about incentives I don't like. I look at an incentive thing and I go, well, shouldn't the base business environment be good enough just to attract a business? But that's just not how America in 2019 works.
Mm-hmm. This is the Fiat Chrysler deal is the first big incentive project, large scale jobs, 5,000 jobs of its kind since going back to Poletown back in the early 80s, and that was huge famous story and everything. You have to wonder, because the auto industry is famously boom and bust, right? That's just the nature of the industry.
Most industries are cyclical, though. Business is cyclical.
But few of them are as severe as the auto industry. We know that well being here in Detroit because we live by the sword, so to speak. The times are either great or they're terrible. There's barely any in between. And I look to Poletown because that's a plant, it's now called Detroit Hamtramck Assembly Plant for GM. It could close. They have unallocated, to use auto industry terms, all the product that are being made there. They're not going to be making it. So that plant right now, today, doesn't have any future product allocated to it. It could close. So it's entirely feasible that 20 years from now, the Jeep brand has lost its luster. Nobody's buying Jeeps anymore.
But do you roll the dice and say it's worth it for the jobs in the meantime, right? I think a lot of economic development officials would say 20 years of good paying jobs, it's worth rolling the dice. That's a question that we have to answer as a community. I'd also note here that it's really clear to me, whether it's this project or a litany of other ones, the number one priority seems to be in development all about a large number of jobs. I don't know if you've picked up that same thing from the conversation. It's all about job creation, and that is going to be number one until things kind of stabilize for the city.
Well, and sure, and any elected official is going to, of course they want this to happen under their watch because it makes them look good, right? It's all about re-election.
Well, for sure. But I think about other metro areas where people have a lot of conversation about parks and all these other things. I think right now, it's a very clear number one, and then they're hoping that it will pay for everything else down the line.
Yeah. The other big thing, obviously, that he dropped was the spin-off projects, the kind of foreshadowing. You can't really even call it foreshadowing. He basically said this is going to lead to spin-off projects that we're going to be announcing in the next couple of weeks, 3,200 additional jobs, which is really interesting, assuming that all materializes.
There aren't that many spots that could hold 3,200 jobs. I'm just saying.
Right. No, that's true. Well, presumably they won't all be one project or even two. We'll see what happens. But wonder if Poletown had a similar sort of spin-off effect. He drew the comparisons with Poletown. I assume he was talking about Poletown, where he talked about the incentives adding up, 30 years ago to $200,000 or so per job, compared to about $58,000 per job in the current FCA deal. So it's just, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm just wondering if Poletown created spin-off jobs like he's talking about here.
One of the things I thought was interesting in this conversation, I think that I want to leave people with, is the diversification of the economy. To me, that's really crucial, especially noting things like financial services. That was really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. I'd never really, it makes good sense. We've got, as you mentioned, Quicken Loans, Chemical Bank now, Ally Financial, all the, the automotive credit arms, which have been operating for a long time. But it's interesting. It strikes me that maybe there's a larger branding effort needed to try to rebrand Detroit accordingly as a financial services sector, because nobody thinks of us like that. We're not in the same
I think that's kind
as
of
New York or San Francisco or anywhere else that has financial sector jobs.
I feel like that's kind of some of the work he's trying to do with these conversations, right?
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for listening to that conversation. Also, thanks to Alan, who upped his Patreon support at patreon.com/dailydetroit. We really think it's important that...
Thanks, Alan.
Absolutely, that part of Detroit's coverage is paid for by listeners, readers, and the community. And Alan stepped up. I really appreciate you. Sven appreciates you. We all appreciate you. for stepping up at patreon.com/dailydetroit. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.